Carl, see if you can figure out what's wrong with this thing. It won't crank up and everything seems to be put together right.
Bill, I'll see you.
Okay, stop back by. Don't worry about your boy now. He's doing good. It ain't got no gas in it. You see there, Scooter? Thinks of the simplest things first.
Welcome to Truman's Town Hall with your host, Matt Truman.
Hello, this is Matt Truman. Thank you for downloading this episode. Thank you for sharing with a friend. And I appreciate everyone sharing with a friend. This podcast is growing week by week. Today is March 18th, 2022, and today we're going to continue to talk about Russia and Ukraine and NATO and what all the news is saying about all this stuff and what other people are saying about this stuff. I got a lot of clips to play for you folks today. Clips you probably aren't seeing on national news here in the United States. The latest and greatest that I'm hearing is the argument for WMDs. Again, you say? But Matt, they have nuclear power plants. And they have biolabs. If that gets in the hands of the evil Russian Empire, Europe is doomed. The U.S. is doomed. Is it really? I'm hearing the usual talking heads say, well, Vladimir Putin is getting desperate. What is he going to do next? We have to be ready. The Biden administration wasn't ready. Look what happened I get all that. Happened in Afghanistan. Yeah, I get that. I get that the Biden administration is handling all of this poorly. They should have handled a lot of things different in the beginning. Like, first and foremost, telling Vladimir Putin and the Russians that no, Ukraine will not join NATO, but they are allies, because we could do the same thing, right? They haven't joined NATO. Wouldn't that be the biggest deterrent? Is that have them join NATO? No, well, maybe, but then we would be in a war, right? So if they would have said from the beginning, they're not joining NATO, would an invasion? Yeah, some would say yes, Matt. The Russians were going to invade anyway. Others would say no. No, they probably wouldn't have. NATO countries are on the border of Russia with big weapons. And as the clip I played at the beginning of this podcast, does it got any gas in it? We have to think of the simplest things first. I think we're being blinded by media. There's a lot of media out there talking war. They are beating this war drum to death. No pun intended. I feel for the Ukrainian people. The children, the women, the people having to leave their homes because of war. I get it. We can be a part of some type of humanitarian aid, and I think we're doing some of that. We could pick up the pieces. Yet, there are Ukrainians sitting at the Mexican border that can't get in. If you follow Ed Calderon over on Instagram, he used to be a Mexican police officer, and he used to hunt down drug cartels and things, right? And he is over on the Tijuana side of the Mexican border. He can go back and forth. He's worked that avenue before, right? And he's showing on his Instagram, Ukrainians at the border can't get in. Why not? Why aren't we setting up some type of a fast track to get them in the United States and help them out? Because we don't really care in a government level. We don't really care. Governments only care about what's best for them right now. That's a shame. What is best for the United States people? That's been thrown out the window. What is best for people in general? I mean, we could go in a broad spectrum and talk about how gas prices and oil prices are going to drive up the cost of everything. Food, the poorest of the poor. And I'm not talking about folks living in Section 8 housing or living on fixed incomes here in the United States. I'm talking about the poorest of the poor in Africa. Right? Those people are going to starve to death. We're creating sanctions around the world, driving up oil prices, right? There's a fallout from all of this. All these decisions have consequences, and that's where we're at now. We have to think of the simplest things first before we start escalating to World War III. And no matter where you look on the news media or you flip through the Twitter sphere and you hear what congressmen are saying, our congressman here in Ohio, Mike Turner, he's been beating this war drum for a while. It's like they've never saw a war they don't want to be a part of. Yet they're not a part of it because they'll never strap on body armor and pick up a weapon. They'll just sit in their pretty little office and send other guys out to go do that. Guys and gals to go out and do the fighting for them, and then they'll take all the credit. But they won't take the blame, no. Not when they lose wars like Vietnam, Afghanistan. I mean, what for? We going to go to war with Russia? Our military, NATO in general, but the United States military would crush Russia. Crush them. I've said that many times on this podcast. We would crush them. Their only deterrent to us is nuclear weapons. Period. Full stop. That's where we're sitting at, folks. That's concerning. If we begin some type of conventional war against Russia, they have no choice. And that's where we're at. Somehow, some way, we need to figure out how to stop this war in a simple way. What do you want, Putin? Okay, here's what we want. Let's compromise. Let's figure this out. This should have been done a long time ago. Russia gave out what they wanted, but that was not good enough for us. No, we're not going to say that Ukraine's not going to join NATO. We're not going to say that because we're going to call your bluff. Well, they called Putin's bluff, and he, I think, got himself into a bit of a quagmire there in Ukraine. I think he screwed himself, but that's on him and the Russian people to decide. What does it mean for the United States to defend Ukraine? Are we defending the rest of Europe if we defend Ukraine? Well, that's what they make it out to seem, but not really. If the Russians attack Poland, that's a different story. The big story there for a couple days was there was a base hit. And when I talk about this, listen, I still think and I pray for all the people that are being killed. It's not that. My heart breaks during war. I don't want war. That's what I'm talking about. Sometimes war is necessary. Now, if Russia attacks Poland, that would be a necessary war. Those are our allies. Those folks have helped us out, much like Russia has helped us out, defeating terrorism, defeating ISIS. Who was one of the first people to call the United States after September 11th? Vladimir Putin, offering assistance to the United States. That's why him and Bush were such good buddies. So how did we get here? How did we get to the Biden administration and then all hell breaks loose and we're at the brink of World War III? And now there's folks talking about, well, WMDs. And we got to stop Russia from getting these. They already have them all. What are we going to stop from them getting and using them on the Ukrainian people? What if, they've talked about false flags before. Do you think Ukraine's government isn't desperate and wouldn't do and hasn't been corrupt in the past and wouldn't set up a false flag? Have you ever heard of Operation Northwoods? The United States was going to do it. Have they done it in the past? It's possible. Folks, think of the simplest things first. There's a lot of things going out through the news that's beating a war drum. And I see some people that were against war starting to talk about, well, maybe we should, because they're being brainwashed by the news. Think of the simplest things first. What is happening now will continue to happen until you develop an open mind and say, look, there are two sides to every story. Do we need to? Okay, there's two friends that are arguing. This is a horrible analogy, and I apologize up front. There are two friends arguing. Do I step in the middle and say, look, guys, this isn't worth it? Or do I wait till they are beating the crap out of each other and try to break it up? They might hit me, right? They might knock me out. One of them. Or if I step in and they decide to, I don't know. Like I said, it's a horrible analogy. When I do these podcasts, I come on here. I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I have an idea in my head because I've been watching, reading, studying history, understanding where we're at. When I was a kid, I used to think adults were the smartest people in the world and they just knew everything. And I felt inferior to adults. And then as I become an adult, I realized, well, many adults have never grown up and they're still little idiots. Even little idiots in power who figured a way to garner that power and get elected or whatever, however they ascend to their power. They get it and they're still dumber than a box of rocks. I'm not claiming to be the smartest man in the world or that I know everything or that I'm right on this subject. I'm just claiming I have an opinion and this is it, right? No war with Russia. We can find a way out of this, but we're raising the stakes when we send in the type of weapons we're starting to send in. Folks want to talk about sending in jets. Folks want to talk, we're sending in, new types of drones. We're sending in new types of anti-aircraft things. And we're also sending in more javelins and more Stinger surface-to-air missiles, right? Is this not escalatory? It is. It is. And a lot of people want that. There's a lot of folks out there that want this war to happen between the United States and Russia. I'm not one of them. Until they set foot on this soil, I'm not one of them. Do I believe in helping folks who are struggling? Yes. We're the richest country in the world. We should help folks. But do we get our people killed for folks? That's a step I'm not ready to take just yet. First clip. I'm going to play for you guys. Sorry about that long diatribe. I'm frustrated when I listen to the news and all they do is talk about war, and how Ukraine is, and I get it. Yes, bad things are happening to Ukrainians, right? But they're not sharing both sides. They're not trying to give you the news. They're trying to give you the narrative that you need to understand before we go to war. It's horrible. I don't know how we got here, but we're here. And if the folks that listen to this podcast and some other podcasts and some other things that are telling you, open your eyes and understand that there's a simpler explanation to all of this. It's not all this stuff they keep throwing at you with WMDs and Putin bad guy. It's all the crap that they threw on us with Trump. It's not that I'm the greatest Trump fan. I'm definitely not a Putin fan. Never said I was. I just know where we're at is not a good place to be. So anyway, I continue the diatribe. First clip, our Congressman Mike Turner talking about taking us to war.
They're shooting missiles into residential areas, dropping bombs on people who are trying to evacuate. This is the air war that Zelensky has described, in which they're murdering so many people. President Zelensky very clearly characterized what President Biden's job is in this conflict, and that is to stand for democracy, stand for peace. And if you're going to stand for those two things, you have to stand for Ukraine. There are a couple ways to secure the airspace over Ukraine. One, of course, is to supply planes, the MiGs that President Zelensky is asking for, that would actually fight or go against Russian fighters. Another is to give them surface-to-air missiles that can make the airspace over Ukraine contested, so the risk is increased of the planes, of the Russian planes that enter their airspace. He asked for no-fly zone. It's going to be very difficult for anyone to agree to put planes up in the air to battle Russian planes. But at the same time, he has called for MiG fighters. They exist. I think we should do everything to get them to them. At first I thought this was not an issue of will, it was an issue of logistics. But I think with the Biden administration now, it is an issue of will. I think they're not working diligently to try to make that happen. The Biden administration needs to step up. I've been very disappointed. Although they have been, publicly making statements of a commitment to give Ukraine the tools and weapons to defend themselves. They've been very slow to do so, and that, of course, has cost Ukrainian lives. I think we need to see strength from President Biden. He seems almost timid and afraid of what Russia may do, as opposed to being appalled at what Russia is doing. He needs to take direct action, assist Ukraine, make certain that it's clear that the United States is going to deter Russian further aggression. I'm not one of those who would jump to saying that this could become World War III. I think we should need to jump to saying that Vladimir Putin needs to understand that this would come at an enormous cost to his country and to his nation, that the world is unified against him, not that the world might dissolve into a world conflict. It really is the world against Russia at this point. But people should not underestimate the value of the words that Vladimir Putin is saying. He's saying he wants to reconstitute the geographical area of the Soviet Union. He means it. When he threatens nations with nuclear weapons, he means it. In this instance, supplying weapons to Ukraine is incredibly important, because what you see is a diminishing of the overall military capability of Russia. I mean, they've not performed well, but at the same time, their losses in Ukraine certainly diminish their overall ability to threaten others. I mean, this is clearly a brutal and horrible regime. The only way that they can respond to is understand that they're being deterred by the overwhelming might and force of the United States. And the president needs to be able to stand up to that and to say that the United States certainly will deter Russia and all threats from them.
There you have Congressman Mike Turner delivering his reasons to go to war with Russia, essentially. He doesn't want to go to war with Russia. He doesn't. He wants to escalate it. He wants to give the MiGs. He wants to do... What if Putin doesn't back down? What if he says that's escalatory? And there's always... that one country I didn't know that would stay out of this, that I didn't think that would stay out of this, was India. I didn't think India, I think they're doing it smartly. I don't necessarily think they're siding with Putin. I just don't think they want to get in the middle of it. India is a nuclear country. India has like the second largest military in the world. Maybe the third largest. They're big. They're always fighting with Pakistan, though. Now, if this war kicks off between NATO and Russia, Pakistan may say, screw it. Let's go to war with India. China may say, let's take Taiwan. Let's hit Australia. Let's take out Japan. There are consequences, folks, to all of this. We have to be prepared for them. Now, if our leaders that we've elected decide that this is what they want to do, they're putting the pressure on Mike Turner, all the war hawks. The Democrats and Republicans are for this right now. Most of them. And when I say for it, I think they're for going to war with Russia. It's insane. I also listened to a podcast by Patrick Bet David. We talked about Oliver Stone and his many documentaries on Ukraine, his interview with Vladimir Putin, and just a number of different... Oliver Stone's done a lot of documentaries explaining a lot of the stuff that's happening now and how we've gotten up to this point. I think they're worth a watch if you can find them. Ukraine on Fire, we've talked about that. Interviews with Vladimir Putin, which is on Showtime. But he did a recent interview with Patrick Bet David, and this is a little clip from his podcast, Valuetainment.
Going to Putin. So, my mother's side, they're from Russia, okay? So their Bible was Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. So they're from the Stalin-Lenin era. They escaped Baku, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and they came to Bandar Pahlavi, which is right on Caspian Sea, North Iran, and it's a few hours away from Tehran. And we heard stories, about who Lenin was, who Stalin was, who these guys were, et cetera, et cetera. And then here in America, if you drop the name Putin to the average person, and let's just say David goes on the streets, there's a man on the street in New York, or he does in Miami. If you ask 100 people who's Putin, they're going to say what? dictator, he's this, he's that, he's a murderer. He's going to say all this stuff about him, right? Now, you have actually interviewed with him. I don't know how many hours you guys were together. It was a project that took quite a while to do, and 4 of these interviews were launched. So who is Putin to you, having spent one-on-one time with him? How different is it than what we see on TV, how he's portrayed?
You probably don't want to hear it, but he's a son of Russia in the sense that he has Russian interests are foremost in his mind, as would any leader in any country, whether it's the Philippines or Taiwan or this or that. I mean, cares about his country and he serves it. That's the way that's why he's there, because people feel that he's there. And they talk about he's a tyrant, but he wouldn't stay in office in Russia, the Russia that I know, and many people would agree with this, that if he was a monster, which is pictured in the West, he'd be out of office because it wouldn't work. They have this indirect democracy, so to speak. The people are not happy, things are bad, the guy is out. And that's what happened to a few leaders. So on that point, I went at it without preconceptions, like we talked about earlier. I'd heard all the stories, and of course I spoke to people who told me other things. Among them was Stephen Cohn, who I became very friendly with. Cohn was I think the leading Sovietologist in our country. He studied Russia. He gave me point by point all the descriptions of these murders and who possibly did them. But it would be ridiculous for Putin to have done them, because the motive would have come right back on him. He would have been. It's beyond. The narrative is so poorly constructed against him by the CIA, and it's been a narrative there for 20 years now. 20 years of lying and blaming everything on Russia. You have to be a little bit more fair-minded. You have to be open to say that, is it possible that Russia has done all this and we're the good guys? It's like a good versus bad scenario. It feels like a John Wayne movie. It's not. We're not John Wayne. We have been trying to destabilize Russia since 1917, actually, when we sent an army there in 1918-19 with the 16 other armies to take apart the revolution. This great Democrat, Woodrow Wilson, sent the army. Then again, we didn't recognize Russia till Roosevelt recognized Russia in 1933. Roosevelt is the one who tried, and he reached out to Stalin, and he met with him. He met with him and he liked him. And he said, Uncle Joe, they had fun together. They laughed.
They met in Iran.
They got along. And Roosevelt had a plan, if he'd lived after April of 45, to bring Russia into this Grand Alliance that he wanted. He saw UN Grand Alliance. It was a very strong, good picture of the world. England would be U.S., China, Russia. It was a tragedy. He died in April because Truman came in and he reversed the. It's like Johnson after Kennedy. He reversed the policy with the Russia right away. Right away, they had a horrible meeting. Stalin felt that this was the opening was over, and of course Stalin is not. I'm not saying he was a tyrant. That was a tyrant, and he was a murderer, and he killed people. But that doesn't change the effort that Russia made in World War II and the sacrifice they made and how they helped us too. So you have to balance the good and the bad. The people who hate Russia, of course, point to Stalin as the most evil man of all time, worse than Hitler. So they make a whole scenario about him, but they ignore what the Russians' contribution was to World War II. And Stalin, frankly, held that country together at that time. He was a tough guy. But you have to sometimes you have to lie in bed with people like that to get what you need. And America has to be realistic about it. You can't be a child about comic book heroes. So anyway, Putin is, listen, I'm limited. I spent 4 trips, maybe 30 hours with the man. So, and the result, you should see it. I hope you see it. It's called The Putin Interviews. It's 4 hours long. 4 hours long. It was on Showtime. It still is. And it's available through other channels, too. You can get it probably on Amazon. You can rent it or you can buy it. He answers these questions that we're dealing with today. Ukraine, foremost in his mind at that point. This was 2000, right after 14. This was 16 area. And he tells me the whole story from his point of view. even down to who's firing who. Who are the people who are firing shots at Maidan? It's not pro-Russian forces because they're firing from buildings occupied by the protesters. It's people who are snipers who are firing at the crowd, killing both policemen and protesters. That's the whole point. It was like the same thing that happened in Venezuela back around that time. That's a CIA technique. Color revolution, then you have the violence. The violence breaks out. Somebody's killing somebody, but you kill from both sides. You create this disturbance. And they killed a lot of cops. They killed protesters, and that kicked off. So who did it? Who was firing from those buildings? There were lots of stories about the neo-Nazi gangs that were coming into Kiev from the west of Ukraine. It's most likely them. I mean, it probably was them. It may have been some foreign mercenaries too. So there was all that violence is what creates that mood for change. So they throw the president out illegally. They don't have an election. We install this guy, Victor, whoever he was. Victoria Nuland is there from the State Department. She's the leader of the neocon faction. And the American ambassador, it's all we got the recordings. They're talking about getting rid, and she even says "fuck the EU" because the EU wants to do it more legally. You know, frankly, France and Switzerland were playing a role here, and Germany were playing a very important role in trying to make this a transition that was democratic. Didn't because they were going to have an earlier election. Didn't happen because of the violence. The Nazis have much more power in Ukraine than you think. The United States denies it because they say Zelensky's a Jew, and that's their motivation for saying, well, how can they be neo-Nazi? That's nonsense. Neo-Nazis were there way before Zelensky, and Zelensky had no power. In fact, when he became president, he had to make a deal with them. He had to make a deal with them because they're tough people. They are telling the president what to do. You cannot change the Ukraine policies. You have the United States telling you what to do, and you have the neo-Nazis telling you what to do. And it's disgusting that the United States condones. It doesn't mention them, doesn't talk about them, but basically condones what the neo-Nazis are doing in Ukraine. That's what's sick, really sick. So when you talk about all that, Putin is talking about that. He talks about Ukraine, and he talks a lot about NATO. This was back then. He saw it. For him, it's you're putting my back against the wall. You're pushing me. You're strangling me. We're surrounding them. We made the Baltics very aggressive towards them. Sweden, Finland, Poland has been. We put anti-ballistic missiles in Poland. That's horrible. And Romania. And these missiles can be adapted to an offensive weaponry, and in 5 minutes could be in Moscow. You see, from their point of view, they feel the squeeze. You put his back up against the wall, what are you doing? You're going to create a state either where he's going to go to war and he's going to fight back, and he's got the nuclear weapons to do so. They're crude weapons, but they're very big, strong weapons, hypersonic missiles. We have very refined weapons. We have great weapons too, but I wouldn't want to be there in that war. It's not a war that makes any sense for the world. And we're pushing him to the wall. Either that or else we'll get what we want, which is regime change. Bring in some guy like Yeltsin was in 1990 who would work with us, basically cannibalize the country and allow their resources to be exploited.
It's interesting what you're saying, Oliver, because one of the techniques that was deployed at the fall of the Berlin Wall, remember, was Reagan putting the Pershing missiles in Germany.
I remember that, yeah.
And it really freaked out Gorbachev.
Oh, yeah.
And they went to Iceland, and Gorbachev said, what do you want me to do? And Reagan said, you should have said yes. And so looking back to the lens, is this kind of you think, what I'm hearing is you see a playbook here.
Absolutely. Never changed. The neoconservatives have kept this playbook alive. If you remember the Project for the New American Century, that was the plan to attack all these countries and clean out the Middle East, first of all. It was a husband of Victoria Nuland, Robert Kagan, who was one of the project founders. You can go up to Robert Kagan and you can go to Victoria Nuland on your board there. These are the villains. these are the Foster Dulleses and Alan
Question for you.
Dulleses of the modern era. Her and her husband. She's a beauty. She's a beauty. No, when I see a face like that, it makes me really. And I voted for Biden, and because I thought, the Uncle Joe, he mellowed. He can't be as bad as he used to be when she was for every war America was in. Remember, he was a Cold Warrior. But he never changed. He should be curbing these people instead of appointing them to she comes from the Hillary Clinton period. He's inherited that, and he let her become Undersecretary of State for that region, and that is a huge mistake. Huge mistake. But show me Kagan, her husband. I wonder what their days are like and what their dinners are like.
Well, you're describing some very strange bedfellows. And what's interesting, you were talking about, it's an easy connection, one that I've heard and it seemed very logical, about Eisenhower's prophecy about the military-industrial complex.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In his departing addresses, he brought it up more than once. Apparently Kennedy took that very, very seriously, or already had predilection in that direction. But then you're talking about the intelligence community and the ability to get the go-ahead. Isn't it interesting that Alan Dulles ends up on the Warren Commission?
All right. That was a long clip with Oliver Stone and Patrick Bet-David's podcast, Valuetainment. It's a good podcast. He interviews a lot of folks. You might want to check that out. Oliver Stone talked about Victoria Nuland. We've talked about her previously on the podcast. And if you remember, we played this next clip. It was between Senator Marco Rubio questioning Victoria Nuland about biolabs in Ukraine. And for the longest time, the news was that there are no joint U.S.-Ukrainian biolabs in Ukraine, but that's Russian disinformation. Well, let's listen to the clip again. Victoria Nuland and Senator Marco Rubio. Warhawk.
Does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
I'm sure you're aware that the Russian propaganda groups are already putting out there all kinds of information about how they've uncovered a plot by the Ukrainians to release biological weapons in the country and with NATO's coordination. If there's a biological or chemical weapon incident or attack inside of Ukraine, is there any doubt in your mind that 100% it would be the Russians that would be behind it?
There is no doubt in my mind, Senator, and it is classic Russian technique to blame on the other guy what they're planning to do themselves.
All right, folks. There was the setup. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's not true. But in my view, that was the setup to what we're hearing on the news today. I popped it on the news, and I flip around American news because I want to know what's going on and what our folks are thinking about to see how close we are to World War III if we're not already involved. How long has Ukraine and Russia been going at it? Quite a long time. Crimea, the western portion, the Donbass region. And we're just now concerned about the biolabs and the nuclear facilities that are in Ukraine. We didn't have CIA in Ukraine. We didn't have National Guard troops training soldiers, preparing them for this war. That the Ukrainians are doing a very good job holding off the Russian army. I mean, they're doing an excellent job. But we didn't have anybody over there ready to secure it. Why would that be? Would that be a reason to get involved militarily, the United States versus Russia? I don't know. I'm just asking a question. They're certainly making that case right now, but we didn't have time to secure the biological labs. We didn't have time to secure the nuclear. Now, you might be saying, well, Matt, how do we do that? Folks, that's above my pay grade. But I know we have folks in our government who could have done that, right? It's amazing to me that we're behind the 8 ball on everything. I think it's, and this is just me putting on my little tinfoil hat here, but I think it's all by design, right? It feels like this is orchestrated. Everyone's on the same page in government, practically everyone, right? There's a few standouts who are saying, no, we don't need war, but they don't get the press coverage that others do. They'll say, the Biden administration sucks, but we need to do more, because they're not doing more. I agree with the Biden administration not wanting to give the MiGs. Not that I don't want the folks in Ukraine to be protected. I do. I do want the women and children to be protected. I think it's awful to see what they have to go through. I think this is Putin's war. It's definitely not the United States' war, but we're making it our war through our leaders. And I think that exchange between Rubio and Newland, I think they knew they were going to talk about that day, because there wasn't a question of, well, why didn't we secure those weapons? You knew they were there, and you've known they were there. And we knew, this recent escalation, go from 2014 to this recent escalation. Russia has been building up around the borders and running quote unquote exercises for how long? And we didn't secure the weapons or the bioweapons, or I'm sorry, the biolaboratories, the research facilities, as she says. What were we researching over there? Just questions, folks. Just questions. So there's another clip I'm going to play for you. There's a kid from Ohio who probably watched the news and was like, man, I'm going to go help these guys. I'm going to go help them Ukrainians. And I'm going to go fight for the freedom of Ukraine. It didn't turn out like he thought it was going to be. Here's him talking about this over on the Twitter. And for those who have sensitive ears, it does sound like he's former U.S. military, because he uses the F-bomb. He cusses a lot. So, fair warning. Sometimes we play profanity on this show. So I'm just letting y'all know. This is him, not me.
So for any of you who are wondering what is going on, all right, we were part of the Georgian National Legion, the 102nd Ukrainian Territorial Defense, okay? Our base got fucked up. The base right next to us got fucked up. Americans, British, tons of British dead, all right? They're not saying nothing. They're counting our dead as their dead. They're trying to send us to Kiev with no fucking weapons, no kit, no fucking plates. The people who are lucky enough to get weapons are only getting magazines with like 10 fucking rounds, okay? When they wanted to send us to Kiev, we said no. Our whole group, a bunch of Americans, Canadians, British. So they told us we had to get the fuck out, or they were going to shoot us in the back, all right? So me, this British guy, and another American, we fucking hid in the back of an ambulance to get out. We got to the border, and it was a whole nother mess. When you get to the border, anyone who has kit, anyone who has any military shit, they're fucking pulling you out of the line, and they're sending you back to the front. We got dropped off about 5 clicks from the fucking, from the border, and we walked. And we get to the border, and this humanitarian group with a bunch of ex-SF veterans from England pull us to the side and say, you need to get, pulled us out and fucking, hit us. And they were like, you need to dump all your kit. They're pulling people out, cutting up passports, sending them back. So we dumped our shit. We got, in all of our fucking, we got in, Red Cross vests, and they had, fucking humanitarian passes to get us through the Ukrainian border. People need to stop coming here. It's a trap, and they're not letting you fucking leave. The best way to leave is in a Vic or a car or something. People who get on by vehicle have a better chance of hiding their fucking kit in the back, doing whatever the fuck they can, but do not try to leave Ukraine on foot if you're a volunteer. It's a mess.
And there that kid was talking about what it was like to volunteer for Ukraine. So, folks, I'm just playing you stuff that they're not playing on regular mainstream media. I haven't seen that anywhere. They play over and over and over other things. They talk about other things, the devastation that's happening to Ukraine. And folks, you can watch that. But what they're not talking about is the whole story. They're giving you a one-sided, we need to back Ukraine no matter what. They're not giving you what the other side is talking about, or the whole complete story, not just the other side, because I'm not giving you the Russian side. We can, right? There's a guy named Patrick Lancaster. I'll play him in a minute. He's over on YouTube, and he's an independent journalist, and he's running with the Russian soldiers. He's an American who speaks Russian, and he's given their side of the story. We can play his side of the story too. We played Mike Turner, so there's the Ukraine side, or the America who's for Ukraine side, and we played Marco Rubio and Victoria Nuland, the Americans who are for Ukraine side, and then we can play Patrick Lancaster, the American who's for the Russian side, or an independent journalist. However, he's given their side of the story and what's happening with them. Let's play Patrick Lancaster, independent journalist. He's been over in Ukraine, I think, since 2014, talking about, because there's been an ongoing war in Donbass between Ukraine and the Russian-backed separatists. We all know this, right? So he's been over there reporting about what's happening in Donbass. And there are times when civilian homes are being hit from the Ukrainian side. There are times, they keep talking about war crimes and civilians getting involved. You know what? War sucks. That's why I don't want war, because civilians do get killed. Children, women, men, old folks. And people suffer, and people starve to death. We should do everything possible not to go to war. And we should do everything possible to help folks who are caught in the middle of this war. There's a lot of Ukrainians caught in the middle of this war. There's a lot of Russians caught in the middle of this war. And as we just played, there was an American and British folks caught in the middle of this war because they feel like they're doing something good. I don't know. All right. Let's hear from Patrick Lancaster.
I'm headed there. People are running through the streets, looking to see what has happened. Shelling has just hit center Donetsk. We see behind me here, all these stores have been knocked out. We see at least one injured man here, already in the hospital. See that there's at least two shells that came down, one here and then one there. Children are running. Снимайте, полностью. And center Donetsk has just been hit in a shelling attack. Donetsk is the capital of the anti-Ukraine government, Donetsk People's Republic. Ukraine has launched an attack on the civilian center. There's no military here. You see this a food-carrying truck with vegetables in the back has been destroyed. We've already seen one man injured, put in the ambulance, bloody. Here's another civilian car hit. You see the ambulance? It's mayhem. These are civilians. Here's a city bus. A city bus hit. This is the center of Donetsk with a deliberate attack on the civilian area by Ukraine forces. A civilian bus with a man killed. Oh my God. Oh shit. Oh my God.
That video is awful. It's awful. It was civilians. It was city buses. Hit. Patrick Lancaster calls it a cluster bomb. Cluster bombs are illegal. You know what else is illegal, technically? Molotov cocktails. Why? Not the flame, but the projectile. According to war law and, international law of war, you cannot have a projectile that can't be read by an X-ray or be detected, as they say. Glass can't be detected. If you threw a Molotov cocktail at somebody and the glass went in them, that's a war crime. Right? There's a lot of different things I don't know that people really think about. This is a war. Things are happening on both sides. Russia's doing bad crap. Ukraine's doing bad crap. It's a war. War's hell. And I think we deserve, as people of the world who may be drug into this world war, we deserve to know everything that's happening. And that's all I'm doing here, is I'm trying to give you stuff that you probably aren't hearing anywhere else. Let's go to our friends on WION News and hear what they're talking about.
As the Russian-Ukrainian conflict has now entered into its fourth week, the Russian President Vladimir Putin delivered a stark warning to the dissenters and has called for natural and necessary cleansing of the Russian society. The Kremlin's leader said that the West was, of course, using the fifth column to try and divide the Russian society. He accused the Western allies of funding misinformation to cause civil friction, so as to achieve its ultimate goal of Russia's destruction. They will have to ensure safety. The President Vladimir Putin has said that the Russian people will be able to distinguish between patriots and traitors. In a clear warning to those who are opposed to the war against Ukraine, he said that cleansing the Russian society of the Western fifth column will help strengthen its roots. The Russian leader Mikhail Kasyanov condemned President Putin's statement. He posted on Twitter saying, and I quote, "Putin is of course intensifying his actions to destroy Russia and is essentially announcing the start of mass repression against those who don't agree with the regime," adding that this has happened in our history before. Now remember, Kasyanov had served as Putin's first prime minister in early 2000s. The comments have come as Moscow has opened 3 criminal cases against people spreading what Kremlin is describing as fake news. The Russian Investigative Committee Law Enforcement Agency has said that the accused were actually guilty of spreading fake news against the Russian army on social media. The probes were in fact based on information from the FSB Secret Service, and the Russian authorities have confirmed the suspects' homes have been searched and movement on all suspects had been restricted. This after the Russian Duma had passed a law on the 4th of March, making public actions aimed at discrediting Russia's army to be illegal and banning the spread of fake news and imposing a 15-year jail term on those who violate the law. The law also has alarmed Putin's political opponents as well as independent journalists working in the country who see the law as a bid to try and gag a reportage from ground and also to stagger the information flow to the Russian public.
Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty are on the list.
Meanwhile, the Russian media watchdog has blocked access to BBC's main news website, and the website of BBC's Russian service has also been blocked. This after Moscow's foreign ministry warned of more retaliatory measures against the media. The Roskomnadzor has also blocked access to at least about 31 other media websites inside of Russia, in what is being seen as a sharp crackdown on the ability of the Russians to access independent media. Moscow has also blocked all global tech giants, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The Russian state television employee interrupted a live news program and held up a large sign that read, "No to war," and Russians are against the war. This was the sign that was shown by one of the Russian journalists inside who worked for the Russian state media. Now, the employee in the background who held up that placard that said "No to war," Marina Ovsenikova of Russia's state-run Channel 1, was ordered to pay a penalty. Now, the United States, along with its allies, has criticized Kremlin's efforts to silence its dissenters. The U.S. State Department has also condemned the crackdown on the protesters and the journalists and has lauded the Russian citizens' efforts to stand up against Putin's war. And at least about 15,000 Russians have been detained by Moscow for expressing their opposition to Russia's invasion into Ukraine.
Let's check out what the German news channel DW News has to say.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Russian President Vladimir Putin have again spoken on the phone for just under an hour. According to the Kremlin, Putin accused Ukraine of trying to stall peace talks with unrealistic proposals. But he said Russia is prepared to find solutions to the conflict. That's a claim the West is skeptical about. Scholz urged Putin to implement a ceasefire as soon as possible and to improve the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. Let's get more on this now from DW correspondent Emily Sherman, who was based in our Moscow bureau until it was shut down by the Russian government. Emily, tell us more about this phone call between Chancellor Scholz and Vladimir Putin.
Well, judging from the Kremlin readout, the main focus, of course, was Ukraine. There doesn't seem to have been much progress on the situation there. It was more of a chance, it seems at least, for Putin to present the Russian view to Olaf Scholz, his German counterpart. We heard a lot of what we've been hearing from Russian officials in the last few days as well, which is that the West is ignoring the Ukrainian bombing of Donetsk. They've been talking a lot about the children of Donetsk and how they've been suffering for years and years. That's part of the narrative. The Russian army is apparently doing everything that they can to protect civilians and to create civilian corridors. We've just seen, reports before, about Mariupol and the situation there, the civilians under siege. There were reports this week of, a theater being bombed in Mariupol where many civilians were sheltering as well. Putin, made it clear his view, which is that civilians aren't being hurt. And the most interesting thing, I think, is that he did mention also the ongoing talks with the Ukrainian side. He said that it's the Ukrainian side that's trying to slow things down when the Russians are willing to talk. So that seems to be the beginning almost of a kind of blame game, which is a strategy that we've seen in recent years as well from Russians.
Well, earlier today, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov gave an interview to the pro-Kremlin channel RT, where he talked about the future of the Ukrainian-Russian relationship. What did he say, and what could that mean for the peace talks?
Well, I found it interesting that the interviewer asked Lavrov about the end of this conflict at all, because, we're kind of getting mixed signals about these peace negotiations. That almost is, I think, a positive sign that they're talking at all about the fact that this conflict could end soon, Lavrov talked about close ties, cultural ties between Russia and Ukraine. He even talked about the fact that he himself has friends in Ukraine. And it's just a shame, as he said, that Ukrainians have been indoctrinated by the West when actually there's this historical closeness. Of course, that is rhetoric that we've heard a lot from Russia as well, about basically the Ukrainian people being the same people as the Russians. But when it comes to talks, I think we're getting mixed signals, because on the one hand, we're having this talk about the end of the conflict, and on the other hand, this increasing talk about the fact that it's the Ukrainians slowing down talks, which is something that we've heard in the past when it comes to, for example, the Minsk agreement on peace in Ukraine as well. This blame game.
Talking about future relationships, Lavrov said that his country has lost any illusion that they can ever rely on the West again. What are we to make of that? Briefly, if you can.
Again, I've been talking about the rhetoric, right? The West is increasingly accused by Russia of not following the world order, not following the rules, whereas Russia is following the rules of international order. Lavrov likes to cite, various documents in great detail. The narrative is very much the West is against us, but we will prevail, and that applies to sanctions as well.
Emily Sherman there. Thank you very much, Emily.
Germany's DW News. So we hit news out of India, news out of Germany, and I think we'll leave our international portion with that. I'm not going to give any commentary. You guys heard what they reported. To me, it's almost like the international news reports the news, and what we have over here with our cable news stations is just constant opinion and rhetoric. The whole story's not developed out of American news. Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, you name it. You know who else is coming out with their own rhetoric? Hollywood movie stars. Yeah. Did you guys hear Arnold Schwarzenegger's speech to the Russian people? Well, if you didn't, you're about to, and we're going to end with that. All right? No commentary. There's a lot of things that he talks about that are like, what? Where'd you get that from? Some of it is true. Other points he makes, it's like, that is completely false. That's untrue. Oh, and his dad was a Nazi. Here we go.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm sending this message through various different channels to reach my dear Russian friends and the Russian soldiers serving in Ukraine. I'm speaking to you today because there are things that are going on in the world that are being kept from you. Terrible things that you should know about. But before I talk about the harsh realities, let me just tell you about the Russian who became my hero. In 1961, when I was 14 years old, a very good friend of mine invited me to come to Vienna and to watch the World Weightlifting Championships. I was in the audience when Yuri Petrovich Vlasov won the World Championship title, becoming the first human being to lift 200 kilograms over his head. Somehow a friend of mine got me backstage. All of a sudden, there I was, a 14-year-old boy standing in front of the strongest man in the world. I couldn't believe it. He reached out to shake my hand. I mean, I still had a boy's hand. He had this powerful man's hand that swallowed mine. But he was kind, and he smiled at me. I will never forget that day. Never. I went home and put his photo above my bed to inspire me when I started lifting weights. My father told me to take down that picture and to find a German or an Austrian hero. He got really angry, and we argued back and forth. He didn't like Russians because of his experience in the Second World War. You see, he was injured at Leningrad, where the Nazi army that he was part of did vicious harm to the great city and to its brave people. But I did not take the photograph down, no, because it didn't matter to me what flag Yuri Vlasov carried. My connections to Russia didn't stop there, by the way. Oh, it actually deepened when I traveled there with bodybuilding and for my movies and met all my Russian fans. And on one of those trips, I remember, I met Yuri Vlasov once again. It was in Moscow during the filming of Red Heat, which was the first American movie allowed to film in Red Square. Now, he and I spent the whole day together. He was so thoughtful, so kind, and so smart, and, of course, very giving. He gave me this beautiful blue coffee cup, and ever since then, I've been drinking my coffee out of every morning. Now, the reason why I'm telling you all of those things is that ever since I was 14 years old, I've had nothing but affections and respect for the people of Russia. The strength and the heart of the Russian people have always inspired me. And that is why I hope that you will let me tell you the truth about the war in Ukraine and what is happening there. No one likes to hear something critical of the government. I understand that. But as a longtime friend of the Russian people, I hope that you will hear what I have to say. And may I remind you that I speak with the same heartfelt concern as I spoke to the American people when there was an attempted insurrection on January 6th last year, when a wild crowd was storming the U.S. Capitol, trying to overthrow our government. You see, there are moments like this that are so wrong, and then we have to speak up. And this is exactly the same with your government. I know that your government has told you that this is a war to denazify Ukraine. Denazify Ukraine? This is not true. Ukraine is a country with a Jewish president, I might add, whose father's 3 brothers were all murdered by the Nazis. You see, Ukraine did not start this war. Neither did nationalists or Nazis. Those in power in the Kremlin started this war. This is not the Russian people's war. No. As a matter of fact, let me tell you, what you should know is that 141 nations at the UN voted that Russia was the aggressor and called for it to remove its troops immediately. Only 4 countries in the entire world voted with Russia. That is a fact. See, the world has turned against Russia because of its actions in Ukraine. Whole city blocks have been flattened by Russian artillery and bombs, including a children's hospital, and a maternity hospital. 3 million Ukrainian refugees, mainly women, children, and elderly, fled their country, and many more are trying to seek to get out. It is a humanitarian crisis. Because of its brutality, Russia is now isolated from the society of nations. You're also not being told the truth about the consequences of this war on Russia itself. I regret to tell you that thousands of Russian soldiers that have been killed. They have been caught between Ukrainians fighting for their homeland and the Russian leadership fighting for conquest. Massive amounts of Russian equipment have been destroyed or abandoned. The destruction that Russian bombs are raining down upon innocent civilians has so outraged the world that the strongest global economic sanctions ever taken have been imposed on your country. Those who don't deserve it on both sides of the war will suffer. The Russian government has lied not only to the citizens, but to its soldiers. Some of the soldiers were told they were going to fight Nazis. Some were told that the Ukrainian people would greet them like heroes, and some were told that they were simply going on exercise. They didn't even know that they were going into war. And some were told that they were there to protect ethnic Russians in Ukraine. None of this is true. The fact is that Russian soldiers have faced fierce resistance from the Ukrainians who want to protect their families and their country. When I see babies being pulled out of ruins, I think that I'm watching a documentary about the horrors of the Second World War, not the news of the day. Now let me tell you, when my father arrived in Leningrad, he was all pumped up on the lies of his government. And when he left Leningrad, he was broken, physically and mentally. He lived the rest of his life in pain. Pain from a broken back, pain from the shrapnel that always reminded him of these terrible years, and pain from the guilt that he felt. To the Russian soldiers listening to this broadcast, you already know much of the truth that I've been speaking. You've seen it with your own eyes. I don't want you to be broken like my father. This is not the war to defend Russia that your grandfathers or your great-grandfathers fought. This is an illegal war. Your lives, your limbs, your futures are being sacrificed for a senseless war condemned by the entire world. Now, to those in power in the Kremlin, let me just ask you, why would you sacrifice those young men for your own ambitions? To the soldiers who are listening to this, remember that 11 million Russians have family connections to Ukraine. So every bullet you shoot a brother or a sister. Every bomb or every shell that falls is falling not on an enemy, but on a school, or a hospital, or a home. I know that the Russian people are not aware of such things are happening. So I urge the Russian people and the Russian soldiers in Ukraine to understand the propaganda and the disinformation that you're being told. I ask you to help me spread the truth. Let your fellow Russians know the human catastrophe that is happening in Ukraine. And to President Putin, I say, you started this war. You're leading this war. You can stop this war. Now, let me close with a message to all of the Russians who have been protesting on the streets against the invasion of Ukraine. The world has seen your bravery. We know that you have suffered the consequences of your courage. You have been arrested, you have been jailed, and you have been beaten. You are my new heroes. You have the strength of Yuri Petrovich Vlasov. You have the true heart of Russia. My dear Russian friends, may God bless you all.
There it is. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Austrian and American movie star. Now, I share his anti-war message, right? I don't agree with how he went about saying it. I think there's a lot in there that can be debunked, if you will. I'll let you folks do that, though. We've shared on here a lot of different perspectives today. I would just say this. Try to separate emotion and logic. Sometimes it's best to put the emotion aside and understand logic. Occam's razor. Usually the simplest answer is the answer, right? And that's how we open the podcast today. Does it have any gas in it? See, right there. He thinks of the simplest things. That's me. I'm the dumb guy who checks to see if there's gas in it. Dumb smart. I don't know, folks. Check it all out. Question your government. Question your media. Try to figure out what is right and what is wrong. We did that all through the COVID pandemic, right? What are we being told? Is it right? Is it wrong? A lot of times when they try to silence certain things, it's because they don't want you to know about it. But shouldn't we have all the information? I think so. Ladies and gentlemen, before we end this podcast, I have just saw a report from the Washington Post. It's titled, "As Sanctions Over Ukraine War Mount, Russia Turns to India to Buy Oil and Arms." New Delhi, when Russia faced international condemnation and sanctions after President Vladimir Putin launched his February 24th invasion of Ukraine, India stayed on the diplomatic sidelines. Now as the economic sanctions begin to bite, Moscow is again turning to India. India, the world's biggest oil importer behind China and the United States, has agreed to purchase 3 million barrels of Russian oil at a heavy discount, an Indian official said Thursday. The purchase, which was first reported by the Wall Street Journal, is relatively small given Russia's production and Indian demand, but the volume could increase in the coming months and reinforce a growing perception that India is determined to preserve its extensive trade and military ties with Moscow, even as the United States and its allies urge governments around the world to isolate Russia. Folks, India not only, and I know we got a lot of folks from India listening to this podcast. Folks, you can email us at truepodcast@gmail.com if you have anything that you want me to tell the folks, that the other folks that listen to the podcast. They not only bought oil, India not only bought oil, they bought it in rubles. That's big, folks. That's really, really big. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Matt Truman. You've been listening to Truman's Town Hall. Thank you, and please share with a friend.